Carbonaci. He is a real live Democrat. He was a Biden elector, and he also is on the Board of Tax Review in Cook County, which is one of the largest counties in the United States. Charles Lipson from the University of Chicago joins us, hails from Marks, Mississippi. Judith Sherwin is a conservative lawyer, once upon a time a very left-wing lawyer, but she wasn't a lawyer when she was left-wing, but she was pretty left-wing back in the 60s. And Brent Hamachek, who is with Human Events magazine, he joins us. He says he doesn't want you don't want the title Republican, but you sort of think like a Republican and you talk like a Republican. But
well, if I'm going to vote for somebody, I have to vote for a Republican because I certainly can't vote for a Democrat, right?
Well, there you go. Then I would say you're probably a Republican. We've got some callers on the line. They have been very patient waiting. Let's move. Let's reach out to the great state of Washington, where Dave is listening to us or watching us tonight. Dave, go ahead.
Hey guys, well, I feel like we used to be a greater state before we got so leftist here. We're going towards Chicago, Illinois, and everywhere else. But
yeah.
On this
well, it's
trial,
a beautiful state.
I'll tell you, it is a beautiful state. Thank you. I'm so irritated by the emotional status that people seem to be taking on things rather than a logical, critical thinking type thought process. Even though this process was not a legal process, it's a political process, we still have the underlying fundamental basis in this country of justice that you are innocent until proven guilty. And if we could get into people's souls, I would have been willing to bet that the overwhelming majority of people who voted guilty already had it in their hearts he was guilty at the beginning of this whole charade. I mean, when you have, if this was a fact-based, legal type issue, you would have heard objection, hearsay, speculation, relevance, all over the place. All they kept saying was reportedly this, reportedly that, anonymous sources this and that. I mean, so ridiculous.
Dave, don't you think that's both sides though? I mean, the only person who has publicly stated that he was moved by the trial was Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, and I can see how he made an adjustment.
No, I believe both sides have the same basic issues of not going in with an open, objective mind.
Right.
And as far as the people that voted for conviction on the Republican side, I mean, I think Burr and Toomey, neither one are running for re-election, and most of the others don't have an election for a while, except for Murkowski,
right,
who I think is going to regret what she did. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if you hear Murkowski say she's retiring over the next year or so, that she's not going to run for re-election because she's totally lost any chance of getting a win. And when you talk about the next presidential nominee, when I heard you saying that, Nikki Haley just shot herself in the foot if she ever thought she was running for president because, I mean, I don't know if she's trying to appeal to the mainstream Republican Party, but she just lost a lot of the base that totally objects to this whole trial and the whole way that Trump's been treated, throughout the whole 4 years. You got McConnell.
Dave, let me ask you this question about, because obviously McConnell, he went further out than Nikki Haley did, although he certainly isn't running for president of the United States at any point. My question to you is, there were 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump. There were, let's say, several thousand. I don't think I have a really good grasp on the number of people that were there, but let's say there were several thousand there. Of those several thousand, there were several hundred that appeared to be in the front line of those storming the Capitol. So there's a lot of people in the 74 million people who didn't go to Washington. They didn't storm the Capitol. And they may have listened to Mitch McConnell yesterday, and they may have listened to Bill Cassidy, who changed his mind during the trial, or to Burr, although Burr came in late. But I'm wondering is, of the 74 million people, how many of them were enthusiastically cheering what was happening on the Capitol and believed in it and supported it? I mean, see, that to me, that's the unanswered question. I mean, how many Republicans really, at this moment, how many Republicans right now, and if you're a Republican listening to this program, how many right now would go and vote for Donald Trump again tomorrow if he was a candidate for president of the United States? I'm not so sure it's 74 million people.
No, and it depends on the media persuasion, because I'm telling you, the media pushes things in such a negative light all the time. That's why the polls and everything else always tend to stream against him a lot more than they normally would, because every media station paints it in the same way. You see all the pictures of that day and the storming of the Capitol, and yes, there was hundreds of people, even possibly 1,000 people right outside the Capitol. But if you just sit there and watch the screen and don't get caught up in the moment of thinking, oh my God, people are going to the Capitol, and you look at some of the people that are about 10, 15, 20 feet back from the actual building, they're just standing there and watching. They are not the people that are actually entering in and trying to break things and hurt people.
Dave,
that was probably. Go ahead,
Dave. These are the people, and those that were not even there. These are the 74 million people that I'm talking about. Those 74 million people, in 3.5, 4 years, they're going to have an opportunity to vote in a primary. And I'm just wondering how many were lost. Maybe none of them were lost. I don't know.
None of them. None of them.
No, I think in 4 years, 4 years from now, people's memories are short, and you might lose a few million because, there are some that just barely voted for Trump, I'm sure, because, hey, he's the only alternative, just like the Democrats have the same thing with Biden. But you're going to lose a few, but you're not going to lose as many as a lot of the Democrats think because of short-term memory that people have. The same with Murkowski. She has a chance maybe if she tries to run because of short-term memory, but I doubt it. But yeah, I just get upset that the only way you could come to a conviction, status on this whole sham was that you had to think emotionally, and you probably had to actually think beyond incitement of a riot, and you had to think dereliction of duty, which was not a charge that you could come to a conclusion on because they didn't charge that, and that's the only way you could come to that conclusion because there was no incitement, evidence especially if you go in innocent until proven guilty.
Dave, I appreciate your comments very much from the great state of Washington. Let's go to New Hampshire, where Steve is listening to us tonight. Go ahead, Steve. Are you listening on the radio station, on YouTube? How are you listening? How are you seeing us tonight, watching us?
Watching it on YouTube.
Very good. Go ahead.
Okay. I have some questions. First, to my knowledge, when someone gets elected to Congress, and I've been only hearing pieces, so if I'm repeating something that Michael in his eloquence may have already mentioned, I apologize. But Judith mentioned something about Cheney, King's, a number of the people in the House who voted for impeachment, as if they didn't have a duty to do what they thought was to defend the United States and the Constitution. Their oath, to my knowledge, unless it's changed, maybe Judith has changed it, or Charles, but Charles is certainly not one in that camp, that when you get elected, the oath is not to your Republican or Democratic Party, and that these people have conscience, and if they decided that Liz Cheney cannot be considered any stretch of liberal at all, and I would probably disagree with 90% of what Liz Cheney politically, policy-wise, says, would want, but in terms of her understanding what her obligations were, she was 100% correct. And the idea that someone who's elected to Congress only votes for their constituents, which in Judith's opinion, I assume is those who voted for you, not the rest of the people who might be in your district or in your state. In Cheney's case,
I'm so glad you raised that.
That's one point.
When we come back, we're going to let Judith respond to your question
Thank you.
The other end with the music. And we'll also hear from Charles Lipton, who's piped in here. We'll hear from both of them as well as all of our guests. I'm Bruce DuMont, 1-800-723-8289. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thanks very much for joining us tonight on Beyond the Beltway. I want to go to Charles Lipson, who is about to elaborate on Steve's call from New Hampshire.
But let him go first.
How can
We're
we
waiting
forget
for
you, Judith?
music to begin for Judith.
Going to start her. Go ahead, Charles. Make your point, and then we're going to move to Judith.
I am glad that the issue of whether to represent your conscience or your best judgment on the one hand or your constituents on the other came up, because this has been a fundamental issue in Democratic politics for over 200 years. And in fact, the person who first raised it was Edmund Burke, the patron saint of conservatives. He resigned his seat for Bristol, which was a port in England, because he didn't want to vote for what his constituents there wanted with regard to trade policy. Okay. And he told them, he said, I don't owe you my vote. I owe you my best judgment. And all I can say is that this has never been a resolved issue. This is always going to be a tension in politics. I'm sure that Liz Cheney didn't think she was advancing her political career by taking that position. She must have thought it was important in its own right.
And also, by the way, before we go to Judith, let me make the point that as far as I'm concerned, you represent your conscience, and it is up to your state voters, whether they be state or congressional voters. They make the decision as to whether they like you or not and want to send you back. And so if you stand up and do something that is vehemently opposed to your constituency, you may pay a price. But that's the way it is. I don't know if Adam Kinzinger were to run or is planning to run again, would he win or not? But again, he is principled, I do believe, in what his plan is, and so be it. Let him fight it. What's wrong with having a little competition, Judith?
There's nothing wrong with having a little competition, and I think there was a basic misunderstanding of what I said. First of all, I think that I don't know what Lynn Cheney thought she was doing to her political career when she decided to vote to impeach Donald Trump, okay, on completely bogus evidence, okay, skewered evidence, made up evidence, and various other ideas that people came up with who have always disliked Donald Trump, including people in her own party. Okay. I think
including
what
her
I
father.
said, well, let me finish. What I said was many of these people who go to Congress, certainly this is true of the senators, decide that they are no longer creatures of their state. Of course, they take an oath to the Constitution. Part of her oath to the Constitution, and this is true of the senators, certainly in this situation, is they decided that it was okay under the Constitution of the United States, which it is not, I would argue, to impeach a private citizen. And Liz Cheney knew that when she voted for an impeachment, that's what she was voting for. So her duty to her Constitution, I think, was a little bit left in the lurch. That's number one. Number two, I do think that with her duty to the Constitution, she also has a duty to her constituents. And they are not mutually exclusive, but you do have to remember where you came from, okay? And to the extent that your duty to your constituents does not upset your duty to the Constitution, I think you need to pay attention to both of those things.
Do you believe then, let me just ask this to everybody, I mean, do you believe that if the voters in her congressional district want to kick her out, let them do that in 2 years?
Absolutely.
But again, it is not a good idea. And I think this for Republicans and Democrats and those people that support that party. I don't like the idea of someone in Illinois jumping in and deciding they're going to weigh in on who should be representing her district in Wyoming. I don't think that's right.
Oh, I didn't say that anybody should do that.
That's what Matt Gaetz did from Florida.
Well, Matt Gaetz is not. He's not one of the brightest lights in the constellation down there.
No, I never said that anybody should do that. That's not legitimate. I hear you.
I want to move on. I want to move on. I want to move on to Michael Carbonaggi because you have control of the Senate, you've got the House, you have the presidency, and all the problems that we have in the country now. They can be wrapped up and they can be put on the Democratic desk. So my question to you is, Michael, there are millions of Americans who are furious that public schools in their respective states are closed. They've been waiting for well over a year to get them open. So part of their ire is against the previous administration. But all that ire now is on you because your guy said that he wanted to open schools in 100 days and basically had a plan to get the school children back to school. And it appears at this moment, only a month into his administration, that he doesn't have quite the plan in place that everyone on his team, including many of the teachers' unions, agree with. Why is it taking so long to get kids back in school, period. Michael.
Let's have some perspective. We're on day 27 of the Biden-Harris administration here.
Right.
The Trump administration botched the vaccine rollout and everything related to COVID-19 for the past year, and it made it more difficult for the Biden administration coming in. We also have to realize that while we have more vaccines coming online, there are still 100,000 people every day getting infected, and from 1,500 to 2,000 people a day dying from it. So we still need to mask.
Michael, schools.
I will.
Schools, yes, schools.
Yes, but I'm getting there.
CDC, Michael. Talk about the CDC.
Because it's my understanding the CDC today released their school and return to school program, their RTS program. So we filed. So
all of which says go back to school.
So we have hold on. We have to say we're about a month in, and we already have a CDC director who's out front speaking with one voice on behalf of the federal government, with science leading and not politics.
Oh,
clearly
give me a break with the science leading.
Said that, Michael.
She
was remonstrated.
Hold it,
That's
Michael.
right. Exactly right.
Charles Lipson has a comment or a follow-up on that. Michael.
As soon as the CDC director said that it was safe to go back to schools, she was remonstrated by Jen Psaki, the White House press spokesman, as saying she was somehow speaking in her personal capacity, whatever the heck that means. It seems to me that the real problem here is very straightforward. The Democratic Party is torn between parents who want to send their kids back to school and the teachers union, which is such an important part of the Democratic Party base. And I can understand why, if you're Joe Biden and you're basically a weather vane, rather than pointing in one direction on this,
he has been clear, and I know you want to play the
clear
insider game.
One day a week.
You want to play the insider game.
It's
of
not
what
clear.
One day a week.
Folks.
The
CDC chair recognizes Michael to respond,
and that she speaks on behalf of the CDC, and she's speaking clearly on what their plan is, and they're rolling it out.
But his plan is to send people to school one day a week,
was that we are
a month
still
from now.
in the middle of the pandemic. We still have 100,000 people a day getting infected. We have thousands every day dying.
You can spin from now until doomsday. It's not helping. Sorry.
Judith, down. Michael, would you acknowledge that many people who are within your constituency and people in Illinois, the idea of going to school one day a week is not something they believed that Joe Biden was going to give them, especially when many schools in this country already go one day a week or more.
Right.
So again, I'm getting into whether there's a broiling constituency out there that is ready to literally boil up. Now, again, part of that constituency are teachers, but part of a larger portion of those people are parents. And I'm wondering how do you rile up those parents more than they're riled up right now?
Everyone wants to get back to normal. Everybody wants to go back to school and go back to work. But I say hats off to the Biden administration for the first 30 days having a CDC that is coming out with a plan and working with governments and local school districts. There's not a light switch to flip to automatically get every student back into school. I've got 2 high school students, and I just dropped off their saliva test for their school this afternoon so they can go back in for 2 days a week for hybrid. And they have a dashboard that I, as a parent, can see with all the outbreaks in their school and in the community. I want that to happen to every school. We live in a well-off community where we have
Michael,
not every student has that.
Michael, would you acknowledge that last year, when the Trump administration said that they were going to be turning over much of the follow-through on COVID to states, that many states, including Illinois, many states did nothing or screwed it up? I mean, what we're dealing with now is we're dealing with states that didn't get their act together. They didn't repair schools. They didn't do anything else.
What you had was
Donald
Trump,
like $64 billion waiting to be spent.
You had Donald Trump in April and May and said this is a state problem. the states were begging.
It
for the
is
federal
a state problem.
The federal, no, because
Okay.
there's things that only
And now
the
you're
federal
saying
government.
it's a state problem. You just said it.
What
It's a
I'm-
local
no,
problem to
be-
fix
one
the
second.
schools.
Because when Bruce goes back to a year ago and talks about where we were a year ago, if we had shown leadership at that time and had the Defense Production Act ramped up and we'd had more equipment.
To do what with the schools? It's a local problem. We have the same problem with the vaccine distribution.
Judith,
would
one
have
second,
had-
go back. We've got to pause. The music is playing again. 1-800-723-8289. Michael Carbonaggi is our Democrat. Our Republican. Bruce DuMont back in frigid Chicago. Nice to have you with us. And before we go too much further, we wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day, of course, in Chicago is always very special, certainly since 1929 when the famous St. Valentine's Day massacre took place over on Clark Street. But again, it's still 1929, and we're still known for it. But anyway, I want to go back to.
Bruce, I find that Valentine's Day massacre interesting because we have more people killed almost every weekend in Chicago than the Valentine's Day massacre. It's so interesting because we've been talking a lot during this program about public perceptions, right? And the public perception, in fact, for many years, if you told people in Europe you were from Chicago, they would make a Tommy gun motion. And that was 6 people. We have 10 and 12 people killed on ordinary weekends in Chicago.
Yeah.
Like
it's worse now than it was in the 20s and 30s.
Right.
Brent,
you know who changed? You know who changed that viewpoint, Charles?
Who?
Michael Jordan.
Yes, he did.
That's true. That's right.
And when I was in Israel many years after that, instead of people, making the Tommy gun, they all went, Michael Jordan. So he single-handedly changed our image. I think we're back to the old one, though, unfortunately.
Brent, I want to go back to you on the subject. Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, since we're talking about the anniversaries of mass murder, I just want to take a moment. This is the 3rd anniversary of the Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting and mass murder in Parkland, Florida. So keep those families, that wasn't 1929, that was 3 years ago. And those families and those survivors are still struggling with that today. So keep them in your prayers.
Brent, I want to go back to what we were discussing before the last break, and that is who the public is likely to blame or is blaming for what's happening in our public schools. Again, to the public schools that are not yet open. That isn't necessarily everyone who's listening or watching this broadcast this evening, because obviously it is different in certain areas, but certainly in large metropolitan areas like Chicago, the schools are not open with the full degree of teaching. We have our teachers union here that doesn't want to go back until they get their vaccines. Is that a legitimate request? It seems to me, by the way, let me just offer my opinion here. It seems to me that giving vaccines to teachers should have been done early on. Again, it's a demand now of unions, but I think it should have been done early on. But Brent, let's let you tackle this one.
So you asked what the public perception is about this.
Who are they blaming?
Who are they going to blame? Who's the public going to blame? Well, that presumes, of course, inside that question is that the public is some sort of monolithic block. The public's going to blame a whole bunch of different folks depending upon which part of the public you talk about. But what we're seeing today, what we continue to see, and it's not just with the idea of going back to school, it's with everything else that has to do with this virus, is what happens when you take a public health issue and you turn it into a political issue. We're also seeing something that the Professor Lipson would love to talk with him for hours about this. We've also learned a great deal the last 12 months about a question that's been debated for a couple of thousand years, and that is, what is the true nature of man? And I would suggest that Thomas Hobbes had us pegged, and we've proven it. So half of us are a bunch of fearful creatures at the moment. Half of us are trying to take advantage of the fearful. So who they're going to blame for the educational thing depends on whether they're sort of lions or lambs. It depends on whether or not they think that their children are going to go and come home and kill them with a virus, or if they think the virus is a joke. It'll depend on their politics. It'll depend on how they've been persuaded along this by politicians using it at every opportunity as a way to either gain power or release power or grab some sort of control. And along the way, we have taken a people and fractured them so badly. Who are they going to blame? They'll blame somebody, and they'll blame all sorts of different people. And we're a mess. We're not going to come out of this anytime soon. And it won't end when everybody's vaccinated, because the divisions are far.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
And I know he doesn't identify as a Republican, but we'd love to have you on our side, Brent, when you start talking like that. I want to add one thing what Brent said, which is, the American people are not only resilient, but they're also patient. And so far, they've been very patient as scientists in the labs have been doing their work and coming out. And we're approaching the year anniversary of the first outbreak in the U.S. And folks are really at the breaking point. And again, I've got 2 teenage boys, and I know that they're going to talk about the past year the way that I imagine folks talked about in World War II or earlier, of just how they suffered through this. And I've seen them and their friends really showing extraordinarily courage and bravery. And, we try and create an environment for them. We've got great teachers. We've got great administrators. I think that, to Brent's point too,
but we also have some lousy teachers, Michael, don't you?
Sure. Yeah, we do. And we also have some folks who use this as an opportunity to advance their own interests. And
can you stand as a Democrat, and you've been involved in primaries before, some successful, the most recent one not successful. My question to you is, can a Democrat speak in support of quality education, which might be perceived as anti-union? In other words, if they were to demand that the schools be open and frankly be damned with what the teachers union is asking for, could a Democrat survive a primary if that was his or her position?
Sure. Yeah, sure they can.
Tony did.
Yeah, sure they can. Yeah, it's
Charles.
Sure they can. But I don't think that's a false premise to say that if the teachers in some ways aren't in favor of quality, safe, accessible education.
Teachers are mostly in favor of what's good for them, and it strains credulity to say that they're doing it for the children. The Catholic schools in Boston, which have about 35,000 students, have been open all year. They have had three confirmed cases of spread within the schools. They do not, 3 cases where there was an outbreak within the schools. They don't have new facilities. They have old facilities. They pay a lot of attention to cleaning, to masks, and of course you have to obey the rules. This is a problem in our schools, that there's a breakdown of order within the schools as there is everywhere else. But I think that the Democrats' close relationship with the teachers union is a real liability to them nationally, now that people have seen what a problem that is. I would finally say, we talk about K-12 schools, but there's a big difference between, say, grades 6 and below, where there's just no evidence at all that the kids can bring the virus with them into schools and anything else, and the older kids like you have, Michael.
Well, and I want to jump into what Charles was saying there too, which is the separation between, K through 12 through high school through college. And Charles, you're on a campus. I think here in Illinois, for example, we've seen, the higher education folks really leading the way with how you do it, especially when it comes to the online learning. Most virologists say that this is going to happen again in our lifetime. We're going to have another viral outbreak, and we're going to need to be able to adapt quicker and better than we have. And I'm hoping that the federal government makes the investment that really only the federal government can, to share modules and technology and plans with local schools.
The vaccines were all done privately. We had some federal funding, and the main federal funding for that was to start producing vaccines before we knew that they were actually effective. So somebody had to put billions in. But the problem with the problem we're having now is getting the shots into people's arms, and it looks like the only people who can really do it well is Chick-fil-A.
Bruce, could I very quickly
Sure.
on the teachers piece, allow me to shave the group with Occam's razor and say something that isn't going to be terribly popular.
Okay.
But it seems to me, we always want to have this thought that people are really kind of fundamentally good, right? We all mean well. I think that's provably false. So let's use Occam's razor. What's going on here? Teachers unions across the country are basically saying, we don't want to go back in the classroom. We want to stay home. We'll do e-learning, pay us the same, leave our benefits the same, leave our pensions the same. It just sounds to me like this is a way to not work as hard and get paid the same. I don't think it's terribly complicated. And yes, I am impugning their integrity, but I'm not just doing it to teachers. I'll happily do it to anyone. But in this case, I think it's just that simple.
Well,
Judith,
I just want to...
Judith, respond. Do you have a response, Judith?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Brent. I think that is definitely going on here. There is no desire on the part of teachers to get back to school. The example given about the Catholic schools, I think a number of Catholic schools, even in Chicago, have never closed and have been open. I think that they just don't want to go back to school. It's a lot easier to turn on your computer and teach the kids from home than it is to go in the snow maybe tomorrow and go to school and work with your kids, okay?
But the kids may not be learning.
On the other hand, I do think that when they were deciding if they really wanted to open the schools, really, you give the teachers vaccines. I agree with you 100%, Bruce. Teachers should have been in the same group as first responders. If not in the number one group, then certainly in the second group. I just got a vaccine last week.
Okay.
I would gladly have given my space to a teacher. They need to get back to work. We're losing a whole generation of children.
Again, the music is playing again. You hear your voice and the music starts. I'm Bruce DuMont, back shortly from Chicago. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I want to go to a caller. We have Kathy, who's calling and listening to us on KLBJ in Austin, Texas. Are you listening to us or watching us, Kathy?
I'm listening to you today, but I do watch you on YouTube sometimes.
Terrific. Very good.
No, I wanted to say about this, we need to get these kids back to school. And in Texas, there are kids going to school, in school, all over the state. And it's mainly in the cities where the teachers' unions have the most power, and they're pushing back. We have a superintendent here who's trying to get kids back in school full time. I mean, here they have the opportunity to go in school or do out of school, and in Bastrop, Texas, all of those kids have been in school all year long. In Lakeway, it's like that all over this state and other states as well. Where there's a will, there's a way. And we're not hearing about these horrendous outbreaks of corona because these kids are in school. These schools are just dealing with what they've got. And these kids we're doing more harm to these kids with them out of school than in school.
Charles, go ahead.
It's especially true for the younger kids, and it's especially true for parents who need to go to work because they have younger children.
Right.
Because one function of the schools is actually child care.
Right. Absolutely.
And, well, they've got child care that's available here, too, in places. So, these excuses, one day a week is not going to school. That's ridiculous.
Kathy, let me thank you. Kathy, let me thank you very much for calling with your perspective, and I'm very interested in it. But I want to ask you a question because I'm a little bit surprised by some of our callers and even email and text this evening. is no one has really called up and demonstrated any real enthusiasm for Donald Trump to remain an active member of the Republican Party and perhaps a candidate for President of the United States. Now, Kathy, I don't know whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. You're calling from Texas, which may...
Well, I'm a
so
Trump supporter.
My question to you is, what is your reaction to what happened yesterday with the vote to convict Donald Trump, or to acquit him, rather?
Acquit.
I think it was all for show. We all know what happened on the 6th of January was horrendous, but that's not representative of who his supporters are. There are 74 million or more supporters out here who supported this man. And what happened with the how many ever number of people who did actually storm the Capitol, that really isn't representative of the entire body of people who supported him. We supported his policies.
If he were to run again, is that something you would support? Do you like the idea of him running again, or do you think it's time to find someone who agrees with his policies but maybe is a less objectionable in a personal way?
I think everyone is caught up in this question to all of us about, would you vote for him for president again in 2024? I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think we need to deal with what's going on right now. We need to leave this question behind us and move on and ask us, what are the consequences of the executive orders that are being pushed across to all of us each and every day that nobody is talking about? I wish this program would talk about the programs and the things that are being changed every day by this president and his administration. The last administration is gone. We don't know what 2 or 4 years is going to bring. I want to know what we're going to do about right now.
Right.
Well, by the way, just to mention a program note, illegal immigration will be one of our topics for next week, and we do have an immigration lawyer, and I want to hear from her what her interpretation is of what the Biden changes have been in illegal immigration policy, because I think that continues to be something that both Republicans and Democrats are concerned about. Maybe more Republicans than Democrats, but again, there's again, when you get into the weeds on these things,
I think you need to talk about immigration, because we have thousands of Mexicans crossing our border who are not vaccinated. You talk about this virus. We have people coming into this country who are not vaccinated.
Can I jump in and address? Something you said was so important with regard to talking about what's going on now, sort of paraphrasing what you said. So here's my personal appeal to everyone who voted for Donald Trump in 2020. The election is over. Whatever it is you think happened doesn't matter. It's not going to be reversed. We need to stop examining the fraud of 2020, and we need to start focusing on what is in front of us. People like us, we're dissidents now. We've sort of lost everything. And all of the machinery is against us. We've got to look forward.
The one thing I would disagree with that, and that would be, is I don't think we should forget, if we believe there was skullduggery and illegal or fraud in any way, I don't think we should forget it. I don't think it should be the primary thing we bring. But I would like to see Donald Trump and like-minded Republicans, I'd like them to come up with a legislative package that would work at the state level and the federal level that would address some of these issues. I think some of the issues are viable issues. I think they're bipartisan in many ways. But again, I would like
that's what we'll be working on.
Just,
right.
anecdotal
that needs
stuff.
to be done. Absolutely needs to be done.
Got to pause. Our thanks to Brent Hamachek and Judith Sherwin and Charles Lipson and Michael Carbonacci. Thanks for joining us this evening. Our thanks to Connor McKnight for his assistance in the production of this program. Until next week, this is Bruce DuMont. Good night from Chicago.